right on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to be Prodgers, with Bighorn Environmental Sciences. You guys, he's been here multiple times giving us talks. He's going to give us a talk today on a nice slideshow of lessons from 20 years of remediation and revegetation in Riparian Superfund sites in southwest Montana. Please welcome Rich.
Welcome. This is a local project of a local project. If you drove in from the interstate, you cross Silverboat Creek. Look south, 18 miles of remediation back to the edge of Butte. If you leave here and drive north, turn right at the T, go 200 yards, that's Silverboat Creek, another 4 or 5 miles up past Opportunity. So it's right in this area. It's a Superfund remediation, and this one has been implemented by Montana DEQ. In a nutshell, big flood, huge flood, 120 years ago. The mine waste is in uptown Butte, right outside the window in a lot of places. This huge flood brought it all the way down, carried it on down the Clark Fork, some of it already down, all the way down to Missoula. And we began work in 1999. So here we are at the top of the canyon. Between us and going upstream is Durant Canyon. So there's a picture of it, and you can see there's also some old mine works here besides the floodplain. Floodplain's very narrow here. It's not all like that. Mine waste was free for the taking, so here it was used to construct the railroad from Butte to haul the ore to Anaconda. And then down at the bottom here, that'd be part of our floodplain. That's just for effect. I don't know. Okay, this is going to explain it all to you. This is Silverboat Creek, pretty dang straight. This is one of the only places on the whole thing where the channel moved in the whole 120 years. We're up, Butte is up here, and we're down at this end. This is, oh, that's better. This is all mine waste. The white parts are extra salty mine waste. So this was all carried down. This is Brown's Gulch Creek. It comes down through here through box culvert under 2 railroad tracks. It comes around here. And you notice it has some vegetation. Look, it was flooding at the same time, so it kind of washed off the tailings. Now, I'm going to bring you down to the ground right here. So this is Brown's Gulch Creek coming in. This is that little packet of vegetation that kind of got washed, but look, short willows, sclerotic grasses and sedges, no plants at the edge. It's far from clean. A meter of mine waste, and the white stuff is what? Salt. This is that same Brown's Gulch Creek. Now we're back at the box culvert. The curve is gone. This is how it looked a couple years after revegetation. And here it was last year. Last year was a record wet year. And here's the plan view, back to Brown's Gulch. Remember what it looked like. There was no ponds. The creek came along like that, pretty straight. So I think the engineer that designed this, his mother was scared by a sine curve or something like that. But that's how it looks to me, anyway. Now, Fronti nulla fides. Everybody knows a little Latin. It says, beware of appearances. No offense to anybody, but you can cherry pick the photos and make a dog of a project look great in a slideshow. And it's a human tendency, so you always see a little of that. And I could show you nothing but beautiful pictures. That, I can test, is the biggest trout caught on Silverboat Creek since the Civil War. So, Civil War. That's when it started. That's when the mining around Butte started. And probably those mine works that were in that picture. So we created a fishery just as the Clark Fork destroyed one. This is just to show you, I can show you pretty pictures. That's magnificent. Can you believe that's even Superfund remediation? It's wonderful. How about that? Well, what's going on there? That's a tractor track, and those are drill rows. So the engineers told me this was good to go, ready to seed. And that was over 100 acres that looked like that. So we had our problems too. I only put this in, this is Rocky Mountain bee plant. That shows you the spots that aren't acidic, in addition to having metals there. When you have a wetland hydrology, and there's no plants in it, you better be thinking about contamination. Here the blue copper salts are coming up through capillary rise. Here we had some revegetation, and then the contamination came up. I had this picture or a similar one on the cover of a Reclamation magazine. Now, these are avocets and willets. Back here, there's some blue-winged teal, I think. So this is on the cover. No one ever said to me, why are the plants dead? So, Omninovum Pro Magnifico. Everything new is wonderful. You remember when woody debris was the answer to every problem? Somebody got the Natural Resource Damage Program to pay them to throw these sticks on. And you know what? It didn't fix it. So how did we have this residual contamination? Well, right off the bat, not enough samples. You got to remember, back then sampling meant going and taking a sample, submitting it to a laboratory, comes back. Meanwhile, construction is trying to move along, so it wasn't a perfect system. We chose geostatistics, wishful thinking, always. And then they had a thing called over-excavation where they took an extra 6 inches to try to meet the rod requirements for removal. But that's not how it was. It wasn't like it's all a little bit contaminated. It's like this. It's either contaminated or it's good. And here's why geostatistics didn't work. Now, if we took a sample here, it'd be fine. If we took a sample here, it'd be fine. If we took a sample here, it would be contaminated, and you would infer a spherical zone of contamination, which would be all wrong. There's the basic facts. You can read them. But I call your attention to this one, which is really a stupendous accomplishment. Under budget by 1/3. I mean, how many projects have you worked on that didn't use the budget up right off the bat, right? How is it under budget? Spend frugally and slowly using interest. That was the key to this. We only did about one reach, about 1 mile, roughly linear per year, and remove 95% of the contamination and repair, not 99%. So you saw some of that residual contamination. Better to come back and repair that from a financial standpoint than to remove a whole pile of material that isn't contaminated and then the carbon in the air, aside from the cost of it. Now, Pierre gave a talk on this same project on construction, and it doesn't much interest me, so you all know about construction. And this is construction, but I just call your attention to the creek. I'm not crazy about that design, but the point is, we built a new channel, we turned the water into it, and then we reclaimed the old channel as part of the floodplain contamination. Here's a design I do like. 2 lifts. These are soil lifts wrapped in core. You seed them first, then you wrap the core around, so they're pre-seeded underneath it. And this would be where you put your wetland plugs, and this would be where you plant your willows, and of course, they both have seed. At the beginning, we put in a diversion channel for fear that it would flood while it was under construction, and at the beginning, it's also nothing but fear. This proved to be too costly to keep going down, and eventually it did flood, and guess what? It wasn't that bad. Just a picture or two of the stream after remediation. This is Booth Willow. Maybe file that away for a second. We're going to come back to Booth Willow. Come to find out, when we had the floods, the banks that didn't have the willows held up just as good as the one with the willows, which I heard about 1,000 times that you need willows to hold the banks together. Little cannon of milk vetch there. Who would see it but me? Where we did have trouble, if we have an undersized bridge or a culvert, and it sets up an eddy current, and it just chews. That's not, and then eventually we had to put some riprap in there. This is a picture of a bad design. I hope you can see it. The creek is narrowing. We got a new lateral bar. this bank's being eroded and calving in there. That dirt's going to be carried down to the next end point, and that's going to become a point bar. Whereas on the other side, that will be eroding, and that will be coming back the other way. So what does that mean? It means the stream wants more sinuosity. Now, if you have too much sinuosity, you don't transport sediment, so you can't go crazy with it. Just a picture of willows that fell in the bank. And speaking of willows, we planted most of our willows as 10 Ts. So the 10 refers to 10 cubic inches of soil. So it's about 7 inches, and you can plant a lot of them. This is the only picture I got. So here's 3 guys planting. You can just barely see the hodad there, and the guy's hand is kind of a picky thing with a big wide blade. And they're wearing aprons that hold dozens. A good planter can plant 1,000 plus a day, which works out around 2 per minute. So this was a fairly economical way to do things. There's also a role for the bigger plants. One of them is perching sites and so on. We would like to have eagles in there. They were protected when we started the project. But it's also for community development. Great project for kids. Good, feel-good project, you know. Those particular ones we brought in the evening before, and just overnight, one freaking night, come back, and this is what happened. Okay, since we're talking about beavers, this is a great one. Got to tell you, the stream's back here. Beaver can't get through the fence. Beaver says, I don't care about that willow. One night, and this is the difference, they got all the time. One night he says, if I burrow in from the bank and then up into the fence, I can get the cottonwood. What you got? But it wouldn't go down the hole. So then he cut it off here, and it toppled over the fence, and he got it anyway. That's funny, but I got to tell you, it's disappointing, all the effort we put in. Your cottonwoods are mowed down, yeah. But this is not a beaver-free zone. Butte Silverbow notwithstanding. They don't think it's a beaver zone, but we do. In this one here, this is the channel between the 2 rows of willows. That's a doozy, isn't it? That's not too far from here. I call your attention to the fact that it's still loaded with willows after that. And this is the same place where the water's rushing back into the creek from the floodplain. Not to forget the elk. Here's an elk, put his head over the fence and rub. Sometimes it seems like everything is kind of working against your transplants. Okay, suppose you're of an, where would you plant willows? This is a good question. If you're of an analytical mind. Remember Booth willow? This is Booth willow here. This is the response variable. That's relative cover of the plant. This is the hydrologic, or you could call it the soil moisture regime. From ponded, well-drained is a flat-out upland, only gets precipitation. Here we have the particle size classes. Coarses in front, gravelly coarse sand. It only goes back to loam and very little of that because our textures run to the light side. And this is the relative cover of Booth willow. So where would you plant Booth willow? Right here, right? This is SCS terminal, somewhat poorly drained sites. Now you got a little latitude. It can be a little drier. It can be a little wetter. Or it can be a lot wetter, but only if it's on a real, almost rocky, gravelly type site. So a good way to guide your planting. And if you do it right, you get a jungle. I kind of love this one. It has a soil problem there, but it looks great. And if you do it wrong, you have a fiasco. This is another project. But at least they weren't nibbled to death. Okay, here it is, folks. The thing everybody wants, the overhanging bank. There's the overhanging bank right there. Notice this. That's a protector. That tells me that this isn't the bank that we built. That's gone in here. So let's take a close-up look at that. It's the plant roots that make that possible. That's what's holding this dirt up. There's a cottonwood root there. It's harder to see, but you see the fine roots in here. So that's what it takes for an overhanging bank, for an overhanging bank. And this is another one that's in the forming process. Now, you know how PowerPoint prompts you, right? This is what it came up with. Tree, outdoor, plant, lush. I have heard that if AI takes over, it's going to use flattery to manipulate humans to let him do it. But here's what I want you to think of. The creek's on the right here, right? Suppose it came a foot out of the bank. What would happen? Well, it would hit all this resistance, and it would slow, and it would spread, and it would make the water in the channel go faster. Let's say it comes up another foot. It's going to move out further. It's going to slow out here. It's going to spread. Now it's going to be racing in the channel. What happens if we came up another 3 or 4 feet? Well, I can't tell you for sure, but you won't be driving here because that bridge, this is right upstream here, that bridge is going to be washed out before that happens. I feel pretty confident of this vegetation holding things together. And alternatively, you could try a gimmick. Revegetation is all about matching plants to habitats. I just got to tell you, if you saw that in Glacier Park, you'd probably stop and admire the beauty. Can you believe it's a Superfund remediation? So we start with, most places, with cover soil. So we've removed contaminated material, we bring in cover soil. We don't bring enough to bring it back to the original elevation, but we bring in enough to grow plants. And what are we going to say? Well, it's deep borrow, it's biologically inert, there's no organic matter, and there's no structure. Everything you learned in soil class has just been tossed out the window, right? It's pure habitat, and you have to know the habitat finish of the species you can seed, and you should also know the seed market. So you don't come, I've seen people come up with a plan, and you say, where do you think you're going to get this stuff? You can't buy it. So we look at this. I think you're going to see this line, a little harder here, this line. This is cover soil, more light texture here. This is in situ material. You can see some clods here from plowing it up. So we have the 2 distinct edaphic zones here. There's going to be some residual contamination here, but it's not going to be anything like even. When it gets done, you're going to see impaired areas and other places that are fine. Seeding, I wanted to talk the rest of the morning about this, but the other speakers wouldn't let me. This is one of my favorite things, but no time. I'll tell you this, if you have a bad spot, you should be out there hand seeding as soon as you can while it's still receptive to seed. That was one of the real keys to this project. This was a haul road that wasn't reclaimed with the rest of the floodplain there. That's my hand seeding. So if you do it right, you can accomplish a lot with a hand seeder. What do you see here? Well, hydrologically, there may be some wetland, a lot of transition zone, and then some subirrigated. It does show you that we match the plants to the habitat, right? So a couple different, we have seed mixes for each of those that I mentioned. You have to match the plants to the habitat. And here's an upland. Actually, it's near the rest area out here. That's good for about 2 tons an acre. Hydrology is subirrigated. I said upland, but it's subirrigated. Now, revegetation is a soil map, and I hope everybody sees that line. This is cover soil. It has about twice the plant cover necessary to meet the performance requirement. This is in situ soil. What did I tell you earlier? There's going to be some contamination. It doesn't have half the cover. If we put a transect this way, it might pass, though, because we got more than twice the cover on one side, and we got some cover on the other side, so it depends how it gets sampled. One plant stress is another's habitat. You can see this is a mediocre grass soil, but rabbit brush, big sagebrush, it's a better shrub habitat. Let's take it another step. This failed as the first seeding. It's extremely coarse. So I hand seeded that, and that's waxleaf penstemon. Now, there's still sagebrush, there's still a rabbit brush, but this was a perfect match of a plant to a habitat. This is the old core fabric. So the stream bank used to be here, and now it's receded off to this side. This is good revegetation out here, but this didn't. So I hand seeded that with the species I thought would work. That's a different penstemon. That's little flower penstemon, silver sagebrush, matching the plants to the habitat. You get to a wetland, soil's almost irrelevant, and it's nothing. Wetland hydrology is everything, and it's not that hard to get a jungle, partly because waterfowl's got to bring in the propagules you can't buy. How do you know if you have good revegetation? If your boot turns green, probably it's okay. But if you have to measure, and I spent my whole life measuring, we do canopy coverage. It's a method. It's not a term you get to make up and use the way you want. It works like this. That's 1%. That's 5%. That's, well, I'm having a hard time with this, but that's 10%, and that's 15%. There's 25% at the other end. You never seen this before, right? Somebody tell me, what's the canopy coverage of the visible part of that black lab? Did you pay attention? Do I have to give you a clue? 5%? If you somebody say it, it's 5%, right? Now, or 6? Okay, I'm not going to argue 6, but 4? I don't think so. 7? I don't think so. So you're an instant expert. We measured that on a 100-meter transect, 20 plots, so we're sampling a big enough area to get a good sample. So here's one, a little more interesting than most. So what do we see when we look here? Let's try and do a plot. Okay, this stuff with the leaves, the green leaves here, looks like a grass. That's Carex aquatilus. Right off the bat, we know it's a saturated wetland. Okay, and that, we can't see the end of the plot. That's going to be a big number, 70, something big like that. I see a grass here as a grossest stolonifer, but we can't see the base of it, so we can't do the cover on that one. But we can see most of this Booth willow. You're going to know Booth willow when you get it. And what do you think? Between 15 and 20? Somewhere in there. So that's good. Over here, I see some flowers of right here, epilobium, but we can't see that good enough. But this other green one down here is Lotus corniculatus, and we can't, it's 15, something like that. How about back here with the green leaves with the prominent midvein, Scirpus microcarpus? Let's give that a 6 or a 7. And down here we have another willow. So the acute leaf shape, silvery hairy on the bottom, glaucus covering on the stems, we know it's Drummond willow. But I knocked it over with the plot. So really it only gets to 2 or 3 because it should be erect. And I just kind of whacked it. That's how you do one. Here's what a data form looks like. Your species go down here. Your 20 plots go across here. Your computations go over here. Ground cover's down here. Shrub density, we're not going to talk about that, is down there. And then my notes. It says contaminated from 25. Oh, let's look at the cover, 63.9. It says contaminated from 25 to 50 meters. No alfalfa, low cover, in situ. So the cover standard, by the way, is just almost right there, just a little bit off. So we summarized that for the monitoring report. Now we're going to take those species and put them into growth forms so that you can look at them and kind of make sense. Whereas if it was just species, probably not too many of you would know them. You'd say native forbs or perennial grasses, not very much of the weeds here. Down at the bottom, we're going to have the ground cover. Here's the standards. Now, I made these standards right at the beginning. No revegetation, nothing to look at. And I think I set this one a little low. But there's nothing lamer than setting a standard and then saying, we have to make it lower now because we can't meet it. No, you don't get to do that kind of stuff. So better be a little bit low, but I'm a little embarrassed. I could have gone higher than that. These other two aren't bad. So now we're looking at whole reaches about a mile. That's what we do a year. L was done in a year, M was done in a year. And the ones I had in yellow, they improved, okay? And the blue ones, they stayed the same. Now, there's 2 years here, probably a higher precipitation, so it looks like it went up, but I just say they stayed about the same. And then we see the green ones, and they're low, and they're not going anywhere. And that's residual contamination. So the astute plant ecologist would see from the pre-remediation condition that salts might indeed be part of the problem here. It didn't occur to me, but the astute plant ecologist would have. So here we have sub-irrigated hydrology. That means you're going to have some capillary rise, and the whole floodplain looks salty. What are we going to do? We're going to furrow, so the salts rise to the top of the furrow, and the seed germinates down in the bottom of the furrow. Eventually, they'll kind of blend down. We're going to use adapted species, and it does tend to heal. So here's that same area, very near to it. All this blonde grass, that's alkali grass, and a light-seeded grass. Okay, we got a ton of that. I see some seaside arrowgrass. I got that from a private collector. That tells us that maybe it's part of it's more transition zone than sub-irrigated. I see some Baltic rush here. But the point is, we had the right species and the right technique to revegetate that. Whoops, not what I wanted. There's a doozy. I'm sure nobody here says, gee, I wish I got a chance to revegetate that. And yeah, it looks pretty bad. That's 2013. You're not going to believe it, but here it was last year. So The willows died, so I brought in buffalo berry. I seeded it with the mix like before, but there's other seeds in that mix, and although they don't establish when it's really salty, they can come to replace it later. And I might have interseeded it, so you're not even seeing the salty ones. And this is what I meant when I said they heals. Moving water has force, and vernal's flooding is just part of the pattern. Contaminated right there. And ice jams in the winter are part of the pattern. And then you get a gully washer. So this is a sediment pond up here that's to trap sediment from the canyon so that we could proceed and work downstream and not just go slowly down the whole creek. You better believe the engineers were out there every day to see if there was still a sediment pond. And yes, it did move some rocks here. It was a pretty scary event. There's 4 culverts here. It wouldn't have taken too much to take that road out. This is at Crackerville, so you go that north, turn right there. This is during the flood. So the stream, this is the stream. It goes here and curves around out of here, okay? Little residual contamination, maybe only I can see that, a couple orange flags. Whole floodplain is getting hammered, right? We had a flood in 2010 too. Here's farther downstream, taking away our soil. The creek's out here by these protectors somewhere. So it carried away our cover soil, carried away the compost, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, and it left this substrate that was resistant to erosion underneath it, right? Now, what is an engineer going to want? This doesn't look like my drawings at all, right? So we want to bring back cover soil. And if we did do that, we'd have more alfalfa and grass. I have to mention, we had those slideshows earlier. Did you notice that you could really tell the revegetated areas from what the adjacent was? That's because they didn't have any physiognomic diversity. Basically shrubs. Means you can see the nature of the vegetation without knowing the species composition. Okay, so here we had this. It didn't take out the coir fabric. The grasses are coming up after the flood. The willows are doing fine. Did some erosion back here. You look up in the corner there, you'll see that we didn't get to keep all the bank either. So some people looked at this. It's a fiasco. Oh my gosh, EPA kind of was in that category. I look at this, I say, I see soil particle size. I see hydrologic regimes here. This is grist for my mill, right? So I convinced Joel Chavez, the project officer for this, give me a shot. Let me hand seed it with my whirligig. So here's some that's, this looks to me like a first year seeding. And this is pretty rocky substrate. This was seeded that same flood year, that's right. Meanwhile, nature's doing its thing, and those are all volunteer willows. Yeah, so remember we were so scared of a flood? I call it assisted recovery. So I seeded it, and nature came in and put its plants in. Most of these are volunteers. A lot of Roripa parustus, it's kind of a wetland mustard. And back farther, you can see more grasses. The next year, it looked a lot more like ice seeding. And there, you know, it's still rocky there. So we're going to go back. Remember this one? Remember the orange flags, you know, and the big flood and everything? Now, if I took a picture there, there'd be a big bunch of willows right in front of me, and it wouldn't be no picture at all, right? You wouldn't see anything. So I had to go across the bridge and up on the road so I could look down, and that's what it looked like. That's the best. That's the best we have, and it's largely because it flooded. In andare natura renovator integra. Through flooding, nature is reborn. So this was known a long time ago, huh? Up in the canyon, you remember we looked at the railroad grade up there? Okay, from side to side. In this case, and we did this without soil too, this was being planted the year of the flood. So the transplants ended up way out here because you couldn't get anywhere near the creek if you knew where it was, so we lost our woodies in this case. Changing now to weeds, and this is a sigmoid growth curve here. This is a full infestation. This is no weeds. If your idea of weed control is to go like this, you are going to be very frustrated because as soon as you stop, 2 years later, it's going to be right back. And this describes 96% of the weed control I see in southwest Montana. We get them down here. This is us. This is adjacent landowner. This is white top. White top's actually one of the tougher ones to kill. This is adjacent landowner. This is us. This is BN Railroad. That's leafy spurge. This is us. This is the one we couldn't control. This is Matt's going to smile at this. There's a little present from ARCO EPA back at LAO, where I wrote a thing for this Silver Bow County about please don't do this. You don't want to play with exotic invasive species. Well, you can't do anything about this. You can't just go around poison everything. I didn't tell you, but our weed control guys who do a fine job, they use backpack sprayers. We kill them weed by weed. We don't blanket. Plus, this is going to be wet, and you can't go putting herbicide. What would you do? It comes back from rhizomes. It's going to be back to this in a year or two. This is knapweed, and so that's very pervasive. How do we control knapweed? Well, we train chipmunks to eat the blossoms on that. No, actually, we trained backpack sprayers, and they did a fine job, and we don't blanket anything. We kill plant by plant. This is an elk trail. Any hunter would like to see that. Wetland, creek, elk. You can read it. Just a couple pictures for the flavor of it. I noticed there's no plants there. And yeah, there was some contamination there. I gave a report here, a talk here a couple years ago on the birds of silver bow. Those that look like trumpeters to me. The tundra swans have a little yellow thing by their beak. Looks like blue wings down there. My personal buddies. Much photographed by me. So, this has been the project of my life. You can spend a whole career and never get to do things the way you want. Having to confer with people who you don't think are in your league. And so I'm thankful to Tim Riley and Joel Fervez for letting me have the opportunity to do this.
Well, thanks, Rich. That was a great talk. Any questions for Rich?
I told him there's never any questions from me.
He did say that. It's because you're thorough and you covered it all real well, I guess. All right, thanks, Rich.
You bet.